Welcome to the Purdue Extension Crop and Weather Update for May 7th, 2024. These updates are to help growers make informed decisions throughout the season.
My name is Jeff Burbrink, and today is our bi-weekly crop and weather report for our first one in May, and we should have a little bit different meeting than we've had the last two in April, because some things have changed a little bit, but we're still a little wet. So, Austin, with that lead in, I'm going to turn it over to you so you can talk about what's going on with our weather here in Indiana.
Yeah, sure thing. Thanks, Jeff, for having me. I did want to talk a bit about the temperature over the last 30 days. We've been well above normal, and so it's been pretty pleasant outside. We haven't really had any recent freezes to contend with. We did have some freezes back in early April, but that since has moved out. I did know that north of I-70, we do have some peach crop in the state of Indiana that received some damage as a result of that. So certainly some issues early in the season, but did want to caution you that we still are in the frost freeze threat for at least a few more weeks. So we, climatologically speaking, the last dates of which we would have a freeze or a frost would be closer to that third week of May. So just something to keep an eye on as we progress through the time. One of the things that I did want to note is that minimum temperatures have been exceptionally warmer than normal, especially in southern Indiana. You can see areas that were more than 6 degrees above normal during that particular time frame. And one of the other important things to note is that the growing degree days are based on temperature thresholds. And so once we meet that particular threshold, we start accumulating heat units. And we can see across the state, we've had anywhere from 250 all the way down to 500 units down in southern Indiana. And that's anywhere from 40 to 100 units that are above normal for this time of year. So just the warmth is helping that. And so we are already ahead phenologically with a lot of our crops and perennial crops and wooded trees and stuff that these growing degree days really allowed those trees to have new life here this spring. I did want to draw your attention to the Purdue Mesonet Data Hub. So if you type in the purduemesonet.org, you will be able to get to our dashboard, and you'll be able to see all the different sites across the state. We're hoping to continue to fill this map in for folks to be able to get local weather data. And you'll see a gap here in South Central Indiana, but you can get the map view, or you can click on the station view. We pull up this dashboard where you can get current conditions, past 24-hour conditions. You can get this for all the Purdue PAC sites, as well as the additional sites that we've installed here lately. And we'll be adding a new station down in Posey County on Hans Schmidt's family farm. So we'll be getting that down there here within the next few weeks. You also have time series of weather data. So we have air temperature. One of the other issues that we've had, especially with dicamba regulations, we have lower level inversion monitoring going on. And so temperature inversions, typical profile, you have warmer temperatures at the surface and they decrease as you go up within the lower layer of the atmosphere. Sometimes you can get a warmer layer above a cooler layer, and so therefore it traps and the air is very stagnant, stable, and you start having pesticide drift or off-target movements of those pesticides. And you can see here on this graph, the brown indicator is showing the inversion strength that sets up during that time frame. You also get precipitation and soil water content, so the volumetric water content at those particular sites. I did also want to talk to you briefly about soil temperature. We are at the threshold of 50 degrees or more, especially at the 2 and 4 inch depths. So those temperatures are starting to reflect a bit more of like the daytime high temperatures or close to it, and definitely that overnight low, mid 60s to upper 60s across most of the state, minus the PPAC site up near Lake Michigan. And you looked at the 8 and 20 inch depths there as well. Well above the 60 degree mark. So temperature is not the main limitation for crop planting right now, but did want to talk a bit about the precipitation. I did look at the last 24-hour CocoRa's reports. and down in southeastern Indiana where the drier conditions were over the last 30 days, we did have an additional ½ inch to an inch of rainfall in that particular location over the last 24 hours. So much helped out with some of the deficits that we're building up, but really not really conducive to field work. And so that's something that we hope to dry out a bit more so we can continue planting. And I know a lot's going in the ground this morning and overnight, trying to beat this rain that's coming in today and tomorrow. So overall, though, I did want to talk about soil moisture. You look at the different soil textures across the state. I've got all the different sites that are pulled up, and I'll send this to you guys to take a look at later. But you can see the different soil textures by depth and then the available water and the field capacity and the permanent wilting point. So just looking at how soils are relative to drying out and causing issues for plants. And so soil moisture across the state is adequate to above adequate for most areas. And so we were worrying about a bit of dryness down in southeastern Indiana and the Jennings County area. But overall, I mean, that's we've been well above normal on precipitation for the last few months here, but and it's certainly causing some ponding issues. And I did want to note that we have had our second week in a row with no drought conditions within the state. And likely going to be a third week in a row, as our recommendations are to be status quo for this week's drought monitor as well. Wanted to plug the extension drought impacts reports. I note that we have quite a few empty counties here this week, and so please be sure to input that. Even though conditions have been wet lately, we can still communicate that information to the National Weather Service and other folks to let them know how things are currently. The other thing we have with the 7-day precipitation outlook, this is May 7th through May 14th. We have increased chances of precipitation down in southern Indiana with up to 2 inches of precipitation forecasted over the next 7 days. I know don't shoot the messenger, but this is something that we're keeping an eye on. So maybe some regional flooding concerns down in that area, but the rest of the state could see up to an inch or a little bit more. I did want to draw your attention to some severe weather concerns for this afternoon. That'd be May 7th. So enhanced risk for severe weather. That's a 3 out of 5. Pretty much all threats, tornadoes, wind, and hail are on the table for this afternoon. So be weather alerts and pay attention to any National Weather Service forecasts or watches or warnings that come out this afternoon. One of the other things too, tomorrow could be under the gun there as well. And so southern Indiana is in the 3 out of 5 and likely going to see some of this changing over that period of time as well. So we may have some increased risks and hopefully we don't have the issues that Oklahoma had last night with the tornado outbreak that they had down there. May 12th through 16th, 6 to 10 day temperature outlook, near normal chances or near normal temperatures and near normal precipitation, slightly elevated chances for below normal temperatures down in southern Indiana, but overall looks pretty seasonal for this time of year. Near normal chances for or near normal temperatures for the 8 to 14 days. So that's that May 13th and 19th with slightly elevated chances of above normal precipitation. We've talked about this lately, but overall for the month, elevated chances for above normal temperatures and equal chances in the northern half and above normal precipitation for the southern half. But that May, June, July timeframe, this is the same graphic that we talked about last time. But elevated chances for above normal temperatures and above normal chances for above normal precipitation for that May, June, July timeframe. With that, I'll stop and turn it back over to Jeff.
We're gonna go to Christian Krupke.
Okay, thank you, Jeff. Good morning, everybody. A couple of things to cover. I received a couple of calls last week from producers on cutworms and alfalfa weevil were the two insects, and I'll talk a little bit about both of those and maybe answer some questions, while I'm speaking. But of course, I'll take any questions after that. So the first one, cutworm. So we have various types of cutworms in the state, and the only one we monitor for using pheromone traps is black cutworm. That's the migrating one that comes in on storm fronts and so on. And when you see cutworm trap catches, that's black cutworm. That's sort of the big one, the major damage causer. And the pheromone traps specifically refer to male captures of those and allow you to time when you would treat if you have a lot of captures and you have very weedy fields and so on, especially if you have some broadleaf weeds or a broadleaf cover crop. The reason I mention that distinction is because the calls that I got last week were not black cutworms. They were dingy cutworms, claybacked cutworms. So these are resident in Indiana. They don't move into the state each year like black cutworms do. So the point of this whole story is that the trap captures are not the only thing to go by when we're worrying about cutworms, particularly in the southern part of the state, let's say the southern half. You have more of these other species, dingy and clayback cutworms being the major one. The treatments are the same. The approach for killing them is the same pyrethroids and so on that we use that are labeled. But you won't, if you're just banking on trap captures, you won't find out anything about those other species. Okay, that's the cutworm story, and then I'll talk quickly about alfalfa weevil, and then I'll open it up for any questions. We've had a lot more reports of alfalfa weevil than we had in the last couple of years. What are the reasons for that? The old standby is to go to a mild winter for any insect that overwinters in Indiana, and I think in this case it's true. It's probably accurate because alfalfa weevil is not cold hardy. It's one of the ones that overwinters here that really can be impacted by a cold spell. You know, if you get a week, sometimes have those weeks in January where we're well below freezing for a week. That does have an effect on that particular insect. We're kind of getting close to where they don't like to be in terms of temperature. The historical Indiana temperatures were a little cold for them. So for whatever reason, we have higher populations. I've had people last week mention that they weren't getting good control and asking about resistance. So I did a little bit of research into the story on resistance on these insects, and out west, where they grow more alfalfa and have more weevil pressure, and it's a bigger industry, they do have confirmed resistance to pyrethroids in alfalfa weevil. They have a western biotype out there of alfalfa weevil that's separate, different from ours, and sort of geographically isolated. So it doesn't mean that we would have resistance here, but also nobody has looked. The point of the story is to let you know that, you know, hammering away with pyrethroids year after year on this particular pest has led to resistance, not far from here, in some of the western states and the westernmost states or the easternmost states where I saw reports of resistance was Montana, the eastern part of Montana. So that's just a caution to mix pesticides wherever possible. I know the temptation is to go with the cheapest pyrethroid all the time, which is often a generic deltamethrin, lambda-cyhalothrin, and so on. Anytime you can mix something else in there, that's the way to go. There are some combo products that contain a pyrethroid and chlorantraniliprole. That's one approach. Of course, it's more expensive as well. And lots of water to get the compound, to get the insecticide into where the insects are, which is often in those tips, those rolled up leaves, and make sure they contact the insecticide. They have to contact it. So spraying on 2 o'clock in the afternoon on a nice, warm, sunny day is not the best way because they may not be out at that time. They may not be on the move at that time. They tend to be warning feeders more so. So if you're going to schedule a time to spray, the morning would be the best. They would come out, they would feed on the leaves and walk across these residues. So they have to touch it, like a lot of insecticides and all pyrethroids, contact only, the method of killing these insects.
Christian, do you treat new stands of alfalfa weevil differently? How do you do with those new stands that are just peeking through?
No difference. No difference. The only caveat there, of course, is that you don't get the option to cut a little bit early, which I didn't mention is, of course, one of the go-tos if you're close to cutting to sort of accelerate that a little bit. It's one of the quote-unquote treatments that'll arrest alfalfa weevil development, get them. Those larvae will then be in the hay, and that's no problem. That's nothing that we worry about. It is for some other insects, but not for this one. So the short answer to your question is no.
Christian, one thing I'd like to point out is after you cut a field that's pretty heavy with weevil, they can lay there on the ground and just gnaw those new seedlings or the new sprouts as they're coming up. So it is important to keep your eye on that. If there's enough of them laying there on the ground, they will just continue to maul those plants, and you may still end up having to treat.
Yeah, that's a good point. They will not stop feeding. I've never witnessed an infestation that heavy, but I'm sure that's happened. It's probably happening somewhere right at this moment. Yeah, they're not going to just say, "Oh well, it's cut. I'll just lay down here and die." They're going to keep on hammering away.
I've seen them so thick in a couple of fields years ago that when they were cutting, the bar on the cutter was just covered with weevil, and those were the fields that were the ones that did not come back up. And I mean, it was about 2 weeks later after they had cut the field that they realized, hey, we don't have any regrowth yet. So it is something to keep your eye on.
Yeah, one note I'll add in here that may be interesting to people is that alfalfa weevil are one of the most parasitized and preyed upon of our pests. So there's a lot of work in that alfalfa weevil resistance group where they try to promote natural enemies and only treating if you have an infestation it's treatable and all these sorts of things. Just because there is a lot of parasitism, it's not a completely free ride for them. But as you pointed out, when they can get into extreme numbers where that's just absolutely not an option. Oh, I see a question here in the chat. Is there a time to spray to avoid bees? Yeah, so there is language on the label that specifies that you should avoid bees. The first point and the simplest one I think that most people are aware of is avoiding the bloom is the first key. So where there are blooming plants where bees are foraging, avoiding sprays is the first rule of thumb. And that can include adjacent crops, and that's to protect things like fruit trees and so on. So aside from that, spraying alfalfa should be fine if there are no flowers and so on. There may be some weeds and flowering weeds in the crop. Of course, it's not really, the label isn't really referring to that in terms of avoiding bloom. But the time of day to avoid bees, more generally, would be in the evening. Because usually they pack it up before dusk, and that's if people do need to treat and bees are in the neighborhood or their neighbor's a beekeeper, things like that, and they just need to spray insecticide, then we always recommend late afternoon, early evening, as late as possible.
Thank you, Christian, for checking in with us today. Appreciate that.
Thanks.
Safe travels.
Right. Have a good day. Bye-bye.
Okay, next up, we'll go to the agronomy department, and let's start with Dan Quinn today. Dan, you have an update on corn for us.
Not huge updates other than everything broke loose this weekend. I saw USA report was we're up 12 percentage points over the last week in terms of planting. Just about every field I drove past had a planter in it or a cultivator in it or something was going on. Every farmer I work with was going. There's still a few pockets, some parts of even, southern Indiana, I know northwest Indiana caught a little bit of rain, as well, parts of, pockets in the state, but in terms of like central portions of the state, a lot of activity in terms of planting. So I would guess that planting progress number will increase quite a bit for next week. Rain coming across today probably will slow a lot of folks down as well. But went from being behind to just about caught up to the 5-year average. I think 5-year average is like 24% planted at this point in time. So we're right on that edge, but dramatic increase. My team was going, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. So it turned out, a lot of folks worrying about being behind to now being, where they're actually sitting pretty good in terms of planting progress. So, kind of just echoing the same points I've brought up the last, few meetings we've had is just, as corn gets in the ground, it's just really important to pay attention to, emergence patterns and timeliness of emergence, and just looking at the overall health of those crops as they begin to emerge, right? Is there, any crusting issues where we're missing some plants, the corkscrewed, mesocotyls and plants that just can't get up there, seedling diseases, maybe. We've been pretty warm and dry in areas in terms of the planting conditions. Looking at fertilizer injury, that's always a popular one that pops up this time of year, just paying attention to those plants as they begin to emerge. It's a really good time to scout fields as corn plants begin to emerge, just in terms of looking at the stand, the overall health, color, stuff like that. Are they, uniform? Are they kind of look, uneven emergence, got missing plants, stuff like that. So, really, really important time, as planting, goes, and I did drive past some fields where corn was coming up. So there are some folks that were able to sneak some corn in even last week or so. Just important time to assess stands, to assess the health, uniformity, growth of those plants as they begin to emerge, and really pay attention to the roots, right? That's one of the biggest pieces that I always pay attention to at this time of year, and often when I get a call about an issue, it kind of goes back to the roots as well. So nothing huge in terms of updates other than planting has really been going strong the last few days. Might slow down a little bit with this rain coming across the state today and tomorrow, but we're sitting pretty good so far. So.
Okay, thank you. Anybody have some questions for Dan concerning corn? Sean, how's things in soybean and wheat world?
Oh, hot and bothered here. We're wide open. So Dan and I did a podcast on Friday lamenting how behind we were, and then all of a sudden we didn't get anything on Friday, and then the doors were wide open. So a lot of progress on the soybean front as well. I think at the state level on Monday's report was 20%. So most of that includes some activity over the weekend, but I dare say it's going to jump even more considering what happened on Sunday and Monday. A lot more acres got in the ground. Some of the things that were put in a couple weeks ago have been cracking up. So, I want to echo some of the things that Austin talked about. This weather, the precipitation, the soil moisture has been kind of the limitation for a lot of the month of April. It has not been the temperature. And so again, the above average heat unit accumulation, the soil temperature on the minimum side, those things are much higher. So, we planted, I think, around April 22nd, April 23rd, and those beans are up and out of the ground, looking good. VE, so the cotyledons are up and out, growing points up and growing. So looking really good. What I want to bring up within this is that to take a look at those stands. This is the time. We've got plenty of time. If there is any issues or has been any issues with crusting, so go out to take the stand counts, this V1. Those are the points that we can make a decision and still advance. So if we're short, and usually the gray area that I talk about within plant population is 70,000. All right. So if we have a plant stand around 70,000 plants, that's kind of you can kind of flip the coin whether to pull the trigger or not. If it's below that, you definitely want to be filling in. On the soybean front, usually the road of action is to just overseed, keep what's already there, and then overseed. That's a different story than what you hear on the corn front. Soybeans are going to adapt, right? So the ones that are already established, let them benefit from being there already. Let them benefit from having more node accumulation. So VE, VC, they're already deciding that they're going to branch, right? If there's a lot of space, a lot of open sunlight, they're already deciding this early VE, VC, that's cotyledons, unifoliates expanded, to branch out and compensate, okay? But if it's less than that 70,000, fill in is fine. But if you're talking 80, 90,000, I really don't see any reason to be overseeding or filling in or replanting on those situations, especially with the temperatures that we've had. These beans are going to grow. They're going to get got a lot of leaf area. They're going to develop. They're going to cover that open space in a hurry. It's May 6th, 7th. All right, we have time for that to occur. So that's stuff I want to be aware of when we get into these assessing the fields. Usually, most of us are targeting. We're seeding at 140,000. Hope to get anywhere from 100 to 120,000 plants, right? This May to June stand count. So that's our typical. But again, it can withstand and still yield quite well at lower populations. The thing that we want to address with it is if you're overseeing it at 80 or 90,000, you're taking out probably 20% of the plant. So you're taking out what's already established. The same kind of thing in terms of seed treatments, that 3-week period's in the back of our mind. Sulfur has been one that we've looked at for a number of years. I've seen some pretty interesting interactions with planting date, and I want people to understand it's not planting date per se as it is soil temperature. Okay, and so this relationship on the ground that typically, like here in West Lafayette, good black dirt, where you wouldn't think you'd have a lot of issues with sulfur supply. When we plant earlier, again, when the soil temperature is normally cooler, that's going to be a case where we have limited mineralization, so that organic matter is not breaking down fast enough for the sulfur supply for the soybeans. And in particular, soybeans need that sulfur for nodulation. And so that's where we've had the boost with our earlier plantings, is because the soil temperatures were cooler. Now, as I've got pulled off to the side as I'm looking here, we've got and from about the southern 2/3 of the state, so the central parts, our soil temperatures are running low 60s to 65. Southern states part 67, 68. Northern third is going to be about 59, 60 degrees. So there is this divide right now in terms of that soil temperature. What I've had over the years is kind of a loose 60-degree breakpoint soil temperature. 60-degree soil temperature is whenever it has been below that is when the odds are in our favor of having a more responsive site to sulfur on soybeans. Okay, now when we go above that, so we're right on that cusp, is whenever that opportunity really probably dissipates on a field that maybe doesn't need it in a normal year. So be aware of that. If you had any growers that are out there looking at that, it might not show up this year because of how warm it has been on this early development. Otherwise, I think let's still hit the ball straight and narrow with timely planting, seed rates. I don't think there's anything else to change on the soybean front.
Keith Johnson.
So I'd just like to say that we really are at a time that perennial cool season grasses and perennial legume seedings hopefully did get completed with the good weather that allowed us to get some row crops done too. So very, very important to get that completed. Later seedings, typically you're going to find that you've got an opportunity for more annual weed encroachment the later you plant. The other thing is in regards to the insect conversation that Dr. Krupke had, and I appreciate the fact that that was talked about, because in the northern tier, I did receive some pictures and conversation about alfalfa weevil being there. I just want to relate the fact that now that we need to be looking for, as the first harvest of alfalfa gets completed, is the potato leafhopper. And that's one that we use that 15-inch diameter net to see how many insects that there are in a sweep and determine whether we utilize an insecticide, or, as was mentioned, a strategy is to do a harvest if the crop is ready to be harvested. And Entomology Extension has a very, very good publication on control of forage insects. So I encourage you to browse that and find Purdue Extension. Control of alfalfa insect pests, and you'll have a lot of information come there in terms of control. If we could go to the pictures, Jeff, that I provided you, I appreciate the fact that a couple of educators did share with me some pictures that they had taken in a farm setting or away. What was the question about this? If you look on the lower right side there, you're going to see a fern-like plant. That was the question, is talking about the invasion of this fern-like plant. I don't have enough background. First time I think I've ever seen this, and there's a fair amount of it there. But in the background, the upper right, that is something that I blew that picture up. That's mayapple that you typically see more in a forested setting, but it's coming into play, and that is a poisonous plant. And so that's kind of a theme that I want to have conversation about here for a couple of minutes. It's very, very important to inventory what's out in those fields and find out if they have poisonous attributes or not. So we're going to find out what that fern-like plant is. If some of you do know what that is, boy, let us all know now, or let me know a little bit later, and I'll share that with the extension educator in question. But again, up in that upper right are those mayaples, and my guess is they probably came from that field edge of forest. Okay, let's go on to the next one. This is one regarding poison hemlock. Very, very interesting picture. You can see on the far left that we've got a fence row there, maybe once upon a time, or is there now. But you can see that the poison hemlock is very, very abundant. And then to the, again, the lower right side, you're going to find that poison hemlocks invaded this particular field. And again, this is a poisonous plant. So again, coming back to the importance of doing inventory and then strategizing what a control will be with these particular weeds. And, you know, at this stage of second year growth of the poison hemlock, it's going to be very, very difficult to control. And I'll let the weed specialists that are on refer to that if they like in terms of best time of control. But certainly this is beyond effective control, particularly in that field that's going to be harvested as hay. The next one is a picture of yellow flowers, and you'll note that in the more on the lower left or the left side, there's a very abundant circle there that we see, and that is, the question was crest leaf groundsel. And so, but if we look to the upper right side, you can see that there's a great amount of yellow too. That one happened to be yellow rocket. And so we have this abundance of yellow flowers this time of year, and even in the summertime that we see. And the crest leaf groundsel, the easiest way for me to describe that to you in this fashion is it's got a daisy-like flower and a hollow stem. And whereas the yellow rocket is more, as you can see, more abundant within the full plant, and certainly is not a daisy-like flower. So the other ones that are yellow blossoming that are happening would be things like wild mustard. Black medic is a medicago, which is a relative of alfalfa, but it's very, very much going to be productive into the month of June, and after that not be. I don't worry about control of that in a pasture setting. One of my favorite forages, bird's foot trefoil, will start blooming now for about a 4 or 5 month time frame, and so that's happens to be another one that we can see with yellow flowers. But I think this is a real timely picture that we see here. This came to me last week, and you can see that we have two types of plants, one to be concerned about, which is the crest leaf groundsel of being potentially toxic, whereas the yellow rocket is not. And so with that, I'd like to just end with the next slide, Jeff. I'm very, very pleased of the team that put this toxic plant exhibit down at the Southern Indiana Purdue Ag Center. We have 21 plants that are there in these rings. And there's a QR code on each of these stakes. So visitors to the Southern Indiana Purdue Ag Center, and just to the right of that exhibit is the Animal Disease Diagnostic Lab. And so people that unfortunately have to come to the lab with an animal that's met its maker can come over here and take a look, and certainly available for field days and any visitors that are there. And so we have the plants and the rings, we have the QR codes, and this was work that was done by Jake Tower, who's an undergraduate student. Jason Tower is the superintendent. Dr. Grant Burcham is the diagnostician. And your own Molly Hassenauer was a component of this, as well as Marcus Muse, who helped get the website developed. So this is a website, Toxic Plants, Purdue University. This one will come up fairly quickly on the browse. Would encourage you to take a look. It's got not only pictures, but it goes into expectations of when you see them grow, and also then from the diagnostic standpoint, how much of this particular weed would an animal have to eat to have chronic or acute problems. So I encourage you to take a look at that and share it with your clientele. So with that, Jeff, that'll be my message today.
Hey, Keith.
Yes.
Another yellow flower that I've actually had two different pasture folks bring me is buttercup. What's your concern about buttercup?
Yeah, thank you. Yes, that is another one that has a compound in it, and I can't, in my brain, rattle off what the particular compound is, but it can cause some gastrointestinal burns. It certainly is one that should be in control, and I understand through yourselves and also individuals that are ag professionals that look at control of such things, that it has become more and more of a problem. So yes, it would be on my list of concern. We don't need the gastrointestinal type of problems, mouth problems, esophagus problems with the compound that is in that buttercup. So yes, that's another yellow flower.
Any other questions for Keith? Question in the chat there, Keith. It says, notice that we have had a couple of hayfields dropped over the weekend in central Indiana. How much earlier is this compared to normal?
Yeah, so it's a matter of what the forage actually is as to whether I would declare it early or not. If this was a cool season grass that was in the boot stage, is just a couple of days before you start seeing head or inflorescence emergence, that would be a very timely, and quality of the forage should be good. I would like to see alfalfa at first harvest. Number one, it may not be the best indicator with first harvest, but I would like to see it be at least mid to late bud, which is regarding where the flowers will emerge from several days after that. But if it were mid bud or beyond, should be fine for alfalfa. Red clover, I would prefer to see that red clover has about a third bloom for first harvest of it. So yes, we are early this year. There is no doubt about it. And I wouldn't be surprised, frankly, if we're 2 weeks ahead of normal. And others of you can reflect on that, but I've been around long enough and know that I typically think about central Indiana and Memorial Day or the last week of May, and certainly there ought to be hay harvest be a lot earlier than that this year. Regarding the first harvest of alfalfa, it's a better indicator to get down on your hands and knees, part the canopy, because many times those purplish blooms tend not to show up as they do pretty routinely in the second, third, and fourth harvest. And so get down your hands and knees, part away. And if you see the new growth, the new buds down at ground level in that crown, and they're starting to grow, that's an indication that harvest can proceed, even though you might be seeing very, 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 very few purple blossoms.
Good point, Keith. Thank you.
You're welcome.
I noticed in the chat that Bill Johnson has listed a reminder that poison hemlock control and crestleaf groundsel control information is in the weed control guide. So, make sure you got a copy of that on hand to look that up. Looking for some more information. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and move to the botany department, and Bill Johnson, I believe, still on the call.
All right. So just a couple of quick things I thought I would bring up. So the only thing that kind of approaches having any urgency is it looks like in southern Indiana, we've got some issues where annual ryegrass has crept into some fields that have cereal rye. So it's either from a contaminated seed source, or perhaps, Travis's Liglighter from Western Kentucky has been making too many trips up to Indianapolis, and he's dropped seed along the way. That's a joke. But anyway, I've had a number of calls this spring, over a dozen calls about guys that have terminated cereal rye, and there's one species that's not controlled well. When they send close-up pictures of the cereal rye, there's some annual ryegrass in it. So I don't know if there's a bad batch of seed that got spread around or what happened there. So we did, 8 or 9 years ago, we did do a publication on how to terminate annual ryegrass. It is a little more challenging than cereal ryegrass, and there is a possibility that we have some glyphosate or Roundup resistant biotypes as well, because it's that Roundup resistant biotype is fairly prevalent in Western Kentucky. The other thing that's cropped up as well in my conversations is as the corn has come out of the ground, a lot of guys haven't gotten their pre-emerge herbicide put on yet, and they still want to put some nitrogen on as well. And so typically it's a very common practice to put on your soil applied pre-emerge herbicides in nitrogen solutions, like 28 or 32% nitrogen solutions, as they supply nitrogen to their corn crop. What happens is once the corn comes up, then many of the labels will say, do not apply your residual herbicides in a concentrated nitrogen solution like that, because you'll run into a situation where crop injury is much more likely to happen. So again, I think it's important to consult the label to see if the label has any warnings on there about doing that sort of thing. But again, typically that's where we run into some injury situations, is kind of spiked to V2 stage corn. It goes on with some kind of a corn premix, and it really heats that premix up on the corn. Typically, we're not losing a lot of stand, but the corn will look kind of rough for a couple of days until it grows out of that injury. That's really all I had from a weed science update. I don't know if Marcelo is still on. He might have a few comments as well.
I really don't have much to add to what Bill said. I would say just in terms of crop injury samples, I haven't got many yet. With all the progress that they got with corn and soybeans this weekend, we'll see what happens over the next few days, and then as those crops come up, watch out for crop injury, especially the PPOs and soybeans. If we have storms coming through as the soybeans are emerging, you can have some splashing injury from that. So that will be something to watch out in the soybean, at least as they come up. But other than that, I haven't got many samples yet.
Thank you, Marcelo. How about Tommy? Tommy Butts, are you still on with us today?
I am. I'm here.
Okay.
I don't have a whole lot to add either. Other than I figured I'd just chime in and support Bill's comments on annual ryegrass coming from Arkansas. Annual ryegrass was in my top 5 list of weeds down there. It was a really, really bad weed species for us to deal with across all the crops. And we had multiple resistances popping up, glyphosate resistance, ALS resistance, and we had clethodim resistance popping up. And there's a few places in the country, North Carolina and Louisiana, to name a couple, where there's paraquat resistant annual ryegrass now. So it's a bad deal. And so just keeping an eye on it, making sure we're managing it closely is really important. And please don't blame me for bringing the seed up from Arkansas. Okay. That's not my bad. All right. But it is a bad one to watch out for. The other thing I was just going to chime in on too, and it kind of goes with Bill's comments on the nitrogen, is also just watching tank mixes with various herbicides that we're trying to throw in together or other things. Of particular note right now, the one I wanted to mention is mixing some of our grassers and auxins together. is a real bad idea. So stuff like 2,4-D plus select, say we're trying to cover both bases there and we mix those together. There's a lot of antagonism. We lose a lot of weed control, particularly on the grasses, 50, 60 percentage points worth of control as possible. So it's just stuff like that, making sure we're paying attention to some of those little details of what we're mixing together, the timing it's going out. Like Marcelo mentioned, what the weather is kind of around that application. All of that's real important right now as we're trying to run and gun.
Thank you, Tommy. Folks, I'm going to move on to away from the weed topic and move to disease. So, Darcy, are you available to give us an update?
Yeah, I am. I still think we don't have much to talk about in corn and soybeans unless you're having stand issues. So I guess if some stuff went in early, what we planted about 3 weeks ago, we have corn and soybeans up. So we'll be monitoring those for if there's stand issues or pathogens infecting it. And again, I'd say send samples to the clinic if you're having areas of concern or of interest. The other side of it, and I'm going to share my screen here, hopefully. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about wheat. And if those of you haven't seen it, this is the wheat scab update. Can you see that? Okay, Jeff?
Yes, we can.
Okay, so right now I have it set up. This is the current risk forecast. It's set for a susceptible high variety. You can go into this and change it around. So you can see Indiana, there's some areas of orange that are maybe the risk is going up. And as we approach flowering, that's what we want to use this map to assess if we need to put out fungicides to protect against wheat scab. I'm just going to change things around just to show you how the map will change. If you've planted a wheat cultivar that's highly susceptible, that's how the map would change. So you can see if we have something that we've planted we know is really susceptible to Fusarium head blight, all of the state is at very high risk for that disease to develop. If they've selected moderate susceptible or moderate resistance, you can see the risk is going away. So again, first and foremost, cultivar selection. I mean, it's past that point this year, but again, looking at the future, those are some things to think about. But they've also added a unique thing. And if you were looking at a susceptible, that's kind of what these are the maps that I would use to share in my weekly update if I was going to send something out to pest and crop. They've added a new tool that you could zoom in into your area. And then if you wanted to select a site, point into it, and it's going to give you a prediction of the risk. I don't know if I can get this to zoom out where you can see it for that area. And so it's kind of like projecting what the risk is going to change. So you can also see, the moderately or the highly susceptible, again, we're moving into that red area. Maybe if you have a little more susceptible, it's moving into orange, and then those with resistance, remain in yellow, but it is projecting out for a few days looking at the weather forecast. So this is a new tool that they've put in to see if we can help project what's coming in based on the relative humidity and temperature that's coming along for that. So just another tool if you're interested in sharing with your county for that. And on another note, we're monitoring for rusts in wheat. And I would say that where I saw that Illinois found some, that I am interested in seeing if there's any in Indiana. We would like to report on that. So you can see Oklahoma and Kansas have found a lot of stripe rust recently. I've been shared a preliminary risk map, and part of Indiana does have some of that risk if we do have the spores move in for stripe rust. So just be aware of this disease. If you're trying to figure out what it looks like, I pulled some pictures. So this is a really good image of what stripe rust would look like on wheat. So again, you can see how, classic striping of the rust pustules. But I am interested in finding out even if all the way up to harvest, if we see this come in, we're interested in tracking that and see how far it moves in the United States. So that's two diseases we're monitoring in wheat. And again, if you see this, let me know, or if you need help, send samples into the clinic. And that's all I have right now for diseases until we get some more corn and soybeans out of the ground.
Thank you, Darcy. Do we have any questions for Darcy?
And I can put the link of the website here if you're interested. So there's the scab website. And then if you're interested in the stripe rust, those are available as well.
Yeah, these models really make diseases a lot more interesting and fun to talk about and look at too. It's very interesting the way these things are built now.
Now, I say, so the tar spot model's out there with the Tar Spotter app. If you have an iPhone, there's also the Field Prophet that's available for them for free. That's using our modeling and projecting a week out. I don't have it because I'm an Android user, but again, it's available for the iPhone users if you want that. Look at Field Prophet. It's projecting some of that, and it's merged in white mold risk with the tar spot. So that's something that's available too.
Thank you for that disease update, Darcy. That concludes our May 7th crop and weather update from Purdue University Extension. We hope to have you back with us in 2 weeks to hear more as we progress throughout the season.